unfiltered discussions, unexpected guests. No topic is off limits, from sex and relationships to the human condition, personal anxieties, and so much more. The only talk show of its kind in the world. This is The Last Show with David Cooper.
Hello and welcome. Happy Hump Day evening. No update from my cat Tomato, but I should let you know that he's very sweet, very cuddly. Tonight's show, there has been much debate over the correct number of times a week that you should do it, or correct number of times a month. How often should you be getting busy with your special someone? Well, someone's done the research, and it turns out if you do it at least semi-regularly, or in some cases not at all, there may be hope for you. That's right, the optimal number of times a week to smash, and how it relates to your happiness as a couple. That we'll cover in about 10 minutes. Then, it's Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday, the most confusingly named mental health segment in all of broadcasting. This week, our topic, transference and counter-transference. That's right, those strange times in therapy, whether it's a friend helping you or a legitimate therapist, when you get angry with something the person helping you does because it reminds you of your mother. This should be fun. That'll be halfway through the hour. We got a lot to cover. Let's jump in.
Want to be part of The Last Show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
This week, in international condiment scandal news, we have guest Leighton Walters, founder of Found Coffee in Toronto. His cafe serves Australian-style coffee and snacks. One of those snacks, Vegemite on toast. Vegemite is Australia's revered spread that mere mortals find a bit, well, tough to eat. Anyway, back to Leighton. Canadian food inspectors told him to take it off his menu. The reason? Too many vitamins? Too much of a good thing? This kicked off a bizarre showdown on over $8,000 worth of, yeast paste? Is that what it is? All right, back to Leighton again. He fought back. He fought against Canadian food authorities. The story went viral. Even the Australian Prime Minister chimed in, and now his Vegemite is back. Mostly safe. But this raises big questions about food rules, cultural pride, and what happens when a condiment causes an international incident. I'll stop talking because Leighton is here. Leighton, welcome.
G'day, guys. How's it going?
It is going well for me. I can't speak for everyone else. Straight talk. How does it feel knowing you're the man who made Vegemite a national security threat in Canada?
Yeah, who would have thought too many B vitamins would have caused so much of a drama globally? You know what I mean? But it feels kind of overwhelming because I'm a small business owner. I moved to Canada in the midst of the pandemic, fell in love, sold everything in Australia, and started my dream coffee shop over here. And as an Aussie, you can't have an Aussie specialty cafe without your most iconic condiment, Vegemite. And before I even moved here, it was readily available on Amazon, was readily available in grocery stores across Canada for like triple the price that it usually would have been. And so we brought it over ourselves. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to get ripped off by Amazon or any of these big corporations. I'm going to bring it over as the most affordable way I can. So we brought over the first pallet in 2020 and there was never any issues with it. Never really thought there'd be any issues with it until the beginning of this year when apparently too much B vitamins, too much of a good thing can be not good for you, apparently.
So the government froze your pallet, it made you unable to access it. They told you you couldn't serve it, all this nonsense. You were pretty upset. I know I gave a joking introduction here, but you really cried out and you're like, hey, I'm a small business owner and this is messed up. You really poured your heart into this fight.
Yeah, I was pretty upset, to be completely honest, only because, not because of the money, you know what I mean? Money can come and go and all of that. but because of how much effort and how much pride goes into Vegemite. Like Aussies, we've been consuming it for over 100 years. It's a multi-generational product. There's never been a health scare or anything like that. It just seemed to feel like a little bit of government overregulation and government overreach, and then an inspector that didn't really want to put the effort into understanding the cultural significance of the product. So I obviously, we had about 4 to 6 weeks of back and forth where I didn't think much of it. I gave them all the information that they needed. And then just before I was getting admitted to hospital for a double major surgery, they called me up and said, we've made the decision. Vegemite's non-compliant. We're banning it from your shop. You have to remove it off the shelf. You have to take it off your menu, blah, blah, blah. And I just go, is this a joke? I literally was like, are you serious? Because this is the one product that you should not be targeting, especially in the midst of all this trade war discussion. So I kind of just pushed back a little bit, but the inspector was insistent that it was a non-compliant product and I had to comply. Otherwise, I would face enforcement actions, which could be up to $250,000 fine and losing my importing license. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a small business owner. Like I'm trying to just pay myself. You know what I mean? I don't have all this money laying around.
I'm in broadcasting. I can't afford a fine like that. That would put me out of business as well.
Exactly. And so anyway, I kind of pushed back a little bit. I ran around like a crazy person, getting all the Vegemite off the shelves, getting it into safe spaces, making sure it was off the menu, and all of that sort of stuff, because they demanded that I showed them the evidence of it to avoid any enforcement actions. So I did all that sort of stuff. And then the next day, I literally got admitted to hospital for a double major surgery, a 12.5-hour operation.
Wow.
And then I woke up from the anesthetic to a whole heap of non-compliance emails and all that sort of stuff from the CFIA, basically making me feel terrible about this decision. And then on top of that, telling me to get well soon. And so I was so bloody triggered. I'm not even joking. So in the midst of all of this, was dealing with all these complaints from our guests, our customers, Aussie expats, as well as Canadians and travelers and tourists alike that would be traveling to our shop to buy Vegemite because it was still available on Amazon for triple the price.
Yeah, that's insult to injury. The faceless corporations can sell it, but not a small business owner.
That's the double standard. And I think that's what the hook was in this story, is it was like, why are you targeting me as a small business owner when these major corporations are out there charging triple the price for the exact same product? This is ridiculous.
You cry out and the Australian Prime Minister hears your cries and speaks to what you're going through. That must have felt amazing.
Mate, it was like 2:00 in the morning. I'm laying in my hospital bed and my phone blows up from on the other side of the world with all of these reporters wanting interviews and all this, that, and the other. And I was just like, oh my goodness, what do I do? So props to the Prime Minister in the midst of an election cycle, standing up for me, this little Aussie entrepreneur on the other side of the world, because it felt so un-Australian to pull Vegemite off my shelf as an Aussie business owner. But it also felt really un-Canadian because Canada's very, inclusive. It's very diverse culturally. Like we're very welcoming of all types of people and all types of cultures. So it just felt so even un-Canadian to be rejecting such an iconic, vital brand that's been part of the Aussie patriotism and Aussie culture for over 100 years.
There's something about you being a dual citizen here that both nations, the Prime Minister, I don't know that he commented on it, but he retweeted it. The government took up your cause. They got rid of the red tape. The Vegemite was finally allowed in, the horrifyingly disgusting yeast paste. I'm sorry, I can't eat it, man. But you know what? I can relate. As a Jew, we have something called gefilte fish, which is basically cold fish meatloaf, and it's as bad as it sounds, and I love it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I love it.
And that's what it is. We wanted to bring home away from home. We wanted to give, Canada a taste of the Australian specialty coffee scene. And you know what? Vegemite is, probably much like gefilte fish, if that's how I pronounced it right. It's definitely an acquired taste, and it's probably really misunderstood, right? When you know what Vegemite is and how it's used and in the right proportions, it's actually really excellent because it's used kind of similar to miso paste or wasabi. A very small amount goes a long way, and it's used in stocks, stir fries, gravies, soups, cereals, a whole range of baking opportunities. It's actually a really versatile product, and in my view, it's just so incredibly misunderstood.
You're convincing me. How does it feel to be Canada's first vitamin and yeast paste freedom fighter?
Oh, mate, I'm glad I'm not going to jail for the sake of vitamin B. You know what I mean?
Well, Leighton Walters, you can find his cafe Found Coffee in Toronto. Leighton, what a pleasure it was, and I'm glad that Vegemite is back on your shelves.
Cheers. Thanks, David.
Up next, should you be concerned about the number of times you do it a week with your special someone? We'll cover that with someone who's unlocked the secrets of sex frequency. I'm David Cooper. This is The Last Show.
The show that asks the questions other shows are afraid to ask. The Last Show with David Cooper.
How many times a week is the right number of times a week? You know, doing it with that special someone, having sex. Science says once a week just might be that sweet spot. But also, for those who don't do it often or never at all, there might be some hope for you. I'm joined by family science professor at the University of Alberta, Matthew Johnson, to discuss. We're going to talk about what our sex lives say about our relationship and what they don't. Matt, welcome in, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I think every relationship commentator from, the tacky magazines like Cosmo to the highbrow stuff where it's like psychologists, I feel like the question that comes up, how many times a week is the right number of times? And you never get a straight answer from these people, but you looked into this, didn't you?
Yeah. So we were motivated, my research team and I, motivated by actually an article in the New York Times Magazine. It came out about a year ago, and it sought to challenge this conventional wisdom that sex is an essential component of a happy relationship. And they interviewed 30 couples, all of them married, who weren't having sex, but said that they were happy in their relationship. So for us, it kind of raised this broader issue. One, like, how common is this? Couples who don't have sex and who are happy in the relationship in spite of that. And does it really challenge the conventional wisdom that sex is an essential component of high quality relationships? So we looked at a large, diverse sample of 2,000 couples, all of them male, female, so mixed sex couples. They were primarily young adults, 20 to 39 years old, and sought to look at different groups of couples based on how satisfied each partner was and how often they had sex. And what we found in the data was the vast majority, 86%, had frequent sex, which was once a week, and were highly satisfied in their relationship. And then a small subset didn't have sex often, less than, around monthly or less, and they were very dissatisfied. What we didn't find in the data was a high proportion of happy sexless couples. What we actually had to do was dig in manually and go through our data file to find couples who didn't have sex and where both partners were satisfied. And we found some. We found about 2% of the sample that were in so-called happy sexless relationships. It just, very rare, not prevalent enough to really be identified analytically.
I feel very validated right now because I'm a once a week guy. I think my girlfriend would want to be a more than once a week gal, but we make it work.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's he's married with 3 children in his 40s, and him and his wife are like a 3 times a day couple, and they look down on us once a weekers. So I feel very validated. But I want to speak to those who are happy having no sex or very little sex, because your body, your desires, your hormones shift as you age or with life changes like injury, illness, shift in mental health status, and couples stay together and they can stay happy together. So it would stand to reason that it is possible, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we know for a variety of reasons. You mentioned medical issues. Some individuals with a history of trauma, especially sexual trauma, engaging in sex is something that's very difficult for them. A big one is transition to parenthood. That brings around a lot of biological changes, but also just your routine has changed, caring for this, newborn and less time and all of those things. So there's a variety of circumstances that make sex more difficult or impossible for some couples. And I mean, the good thing is sex is not the only part of a relationship. There's lots of other ways that couples derive meaning and satisfaction from their partner. And, we have psychologically the ability to alter what is important to us. And so if at a given time in your relationship, sex is something that's more difficult or not possible, you may focus on other things like shared hobbies, like having really deep, intimate talks with your partner, engaging in new, exciting activities. Like there's lots of ways to derive satisfaction outside of a sexual relationship. And of course, couples are able to do that. The flip side is equally true for most couples. A way that they maintain that emotional and connection with their partner is through regular sexual activity, which we know on average for most couples is about once a week, but there's deviation around that, right? There's, for some couples, your 3 a day friends.
I don't know how he does it. I don't know how I don't want to know how he does it, but it's a
hydration.
Wild... Hydration is the secret.
Yep, there you go. He's well hydrated. But yeah, those experiences absolutely valid. It's not gonna be a very common one. Likewise, there's people who have sex less frequently and also very happy. I think with couples' sexual relationship, the key is kind of calibrating, what's oftentimes differing desires for how often partners want to engage in sex, but striking a middle ground that's reasonable for both partners and that also reflects a priority to connect with your partner in that way. If you hit that ground, which, on average is probably around once a week for most couples, but if you're hitting that, then things are okay. And I think dangers to that are, one, we have kind of, a lot of pressure societally to have sex a certain amount of time, and maybe some beliefs that more is better, or, you need to do certain things in the bedroom to have a good sex life. So I think comparison is a real poisoner of a couple's sex life in many situations. To me, these data like this, and this isn't the only study to have landed on this. Another high profile study a few years ago also landed on that once a week frequency as kind of optimal for maintaining satisfaction. But I think the power of data like this is just that it demystifies something. It gives us something concrete to stand on where, for most couples, weekly is not that unreasonable. They can carve out the time, the space. It kind of matches with a reasonable amount of sexual desire that most partners have, and we think hopefully it can kind of help couples let go of some unrealistic expectations or beliefs they might hold.
We make a rule, like if we haven't done it in a long time because of stressful life stuff, we don't. Let's say 3 weeks.
Yeah,
we don't put pressure on ourselves for that one time, that first time in a while, to be good. Like it can just be okay. It can be average.
Yeah.
I feel like people build this up in their mind because of outside pressure. Oh, we haven't done it in a long time. We need to be doing it. And then when we finally come together and do it, no pun intended there, when we finally get together and do it, there's a lot of pressure for it to be good. And then if it's not good, it's just, really feeds into a cycle of like, oh, we shouldn't do it for a while. So
yeah,
you shouldn't be so hard on yourself because of outside pressure here.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think acceptance, enjoyment, the pressure can certainly diminish enjoyment and desire. There was another, to go on a little tangent here, there was a study a few years ago that wanted to experimentally determine whether having sex made you more happy or not. And so they randomly assigned couples to either have sex twice as much as what was normal for them or have sex as often as they normally did. So if you're in the double sex group, if sex makes you happy, then boom, you're going to be twice as happy because you've been having twice as much sex. And what they found in that experiment is that the twice as frequent sexual group, they actually were less happy. And the reason was because now they had all this pressure to have sex more often, and it killed their sexual desire. So, definitely letting go of those expectations, desire, or pressure from outside sources, and let it be, make it a priority, but have fun and connect with your partner.
Matt, thanks for the chat. Thanks for sharing your research.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Matthew Johnson is a family science professor at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Canada. Up next, has anyone ever helped you in a therapist kind of way, whether it was a real shrink or a friend, and you got angry with something they did because it reminded you of your mother or your childhood? Well, that's called transference, and that's what we'll discuss up next on Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday, because it's Wednesday night.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. When your therapist won't take your calls anymore, there's always the last show with David Cooper.
Have you ever sat in your therapist's chair and irrationally got mad at them for sounding just like your mother? That's a concept called transference. Sometimes it gets even stranger. They might not say it, but your therapist starts feeling and thinking things like that about you. For example, if your therapist gets mad at you for chewing like their ex, that's countertransference. Whenever it happens, the ghost of Freud scribbles notes in his notebook. I'm here with Gary Direnfeld. It's Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday. Gary's an expert in family and marital therapy. Gary, welcome.
I love that introduction. I like the ghost of Freud.
Yeah, or Jung or Jung. I never get the Jungian.
Either.
Wow.
They both have concepts and thoughts and feelings on transference and countertransference. And I liked your intro that, don't treat me like your mother. It's like, I'm not my mother. And, what is that fight all about? And, when we get triggered, very often that trigger comes from those early childhood experiences with our own parents.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think before we were chatting here at the break, you were saying when we meet in person, you're going to give me a hug. And I said, I don't like being hugged. And why not? Because my sister would not let go of me as a child. I was confined. I didn't have bodily autonomy as I was a cute kid, allegedly. I see pictures and see an ugly kid, but whatever. And she just would not stop squeezing me. She'd come home from high school, and she's 7, 8 years older than me. She'd be squeezing me and she wouldn't let go. And I would cry at the very sight of her. And now as an adult, I don't like to be hugged. I don't know if that's transference, but things from our childhood can
affect our adult lives.
And so it stands to reason that would come up in therapy, I suppose if my therapist hugged me, it would come up if you hug me.
Yeah. So, and I warned you because I am a hugger. I'm not a hugger of my clients.
Good. It's inappropriate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen. I will shake a client's hand. That is the most touching that is ever going to occur with me between myself and a client. Having said that, I remember, oh my God, years ago, a client did, move in to give me a hug. And I was a lot younger. I just stood there kind of frozen with my arms at my side. I don't want to be in this position with a client. But, let's come back to transference and countertransference. When someone like myself is acting in the role of therapist and the client seems perhaps triggered or projects onto me issues that I see have likely originated with their parents, we get to use that therapeutically.
Always bring it up, don't sit on it and hide it, because you can have some of the best conversations with your shrink when you actually mention these feelings that are going on. You reminded me of my mother this way. You reminded me of my father this way.
Yeah. Where did that behavior come from? Do you have a recollection of when you first felt this way? And, going to therapy, here's how I describe it. If it's psychotherapy, there's different kinds of therapy, but if it's, psychotherapy, we go there and we put our life experiences up in front of us like stars in the night. And prior to therapy, we have connected the dots between those stars to draw meaning from what we see up there. And we form these constellations. And those constellations are our thoughts, our judgments, our feelings. So because of this, and this, I feel X, Y, and Z. The value of going to therapy is we put those same stars up there, but we draw the lines differently over time. We reconnect, we rework them so that, oh my goodness, my parent wasn't loving. They were actually manipulative when they caused me to dislike the other parent. Holy mackerel. Same stars, but I've redrawn the lines between them, and a different constellation appears to me. And again, so much of this comes out through this transference countertransference process between the client and the therapist, where the client again projects onto the therapist. When I say project, I am seeing something in you, the therapist, that has triggered me, and I'm seeing it this way, and now I realize that comes from my childhood. It's not really a function of you.
It's always the childhood, even when you're not talking about it in therapy. How often does this actually go on, where patients see some behavior that goes on in their sessions and relates it to childhood experiences, actually goes through transference?
The truth of the matter is, it goes on all the time. David, we are bringing who we are to any interaction. It's going on now between you and I. You know, before we got on, we were talking privately. You know, you said, oh no, I don't have that transference to you, Direnfeld. I like you. Well, you like me because you contrasted me to your past and your experience with a parent.
You are not my father. I have a friend who grew up in, he's straight, but he grew up in like his dad was homophobic.
Okay.
There's no other way to say it.
Yeah.
And he had this therapist, and he was like sitting on this fact that he was like attracted to her for years with shame and weirdness. And he would talk about it with friends and never with her. And I think it was me, maybe it wasn't me, who convinced him, tell your therapist, because there's a lot to work on there. And it's not weird for therapists to hear from their patients. There's some signals miswired. And so he told her, and it like immediately rooted back to like a childhood where there was a lot of shame around sexuality. And I think he did a lot of growth there, and he was like holding on to this shame and all this weird stuff. And I wasn't there in the sessions, but that can happen, and it's normal. And the conversation you have from it doesn't have to be like the therapist outraged. It can be working on tough stuff from your childhood, because it's never really about your relationship with your therapist. That's just a professional you see for an hour a week or however long it is.
Yes. And, now to flip this around, therapists have feelings that are triggered by their client. And we want the therapist, and this is why we differentiate the roles. You're the therapist, you're the client. As the therapist, we're trained, hopefully, to be able to recognize when we are triggered and to assess our own feelings, where they come from, and then how do we use that. And I'm going to give you a good example. I could be sitting in front of someone who has caused me some confusion that leaves me a little irritated, perhaps angry, wondering where they're coming from. And, that is not an uncommon experience depending on the mental health diagnosis of the patient. There are some patients with personality disorders that trigger those kinds of feelings in others. So when I have that kind of feeling, I then sit back and wonder, might this person in front of me have that kind of personality disorder? And if so, does that give me a clue that I should be investigating as to where that comes from? Might they have had some early childhood experiences that have yet to be disclosed? And so it helps guide our work.
We are here discussing deep concepts in therapy, transference and countertransference. Is Freud rolling in his grave? That we'll find out when we discuss how often this actually happens in therapy after the break with Gary Direnfeld.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Love, science, and the most outrageous news. It's all here. The last show with David Cooper.
This is good. It's very intellectual, this one, but I really like it.
It's highbrow. We're here with Gary Direnfeld. It's Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday. If you get mad at your therapist for chewing their gum loudly, like your ex-wife, oddly specific example, I won't go into it any more than that, that concept is called transference, when you're kind of projecting somebody else or some feelings in your life onto your therapist. It can happen in the other direction. The therapist can project those things at you. Now, they should and often do handle it like professionals, but that's what we're discussing here on Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday. Transference and counter-transference. It's kind of deep, a little confusing, but we're doing our best. Is Freud rolling in his grave? I don't know. Gary Direnfeld is here. Gary, welcome back.
Listen, I do have counter-transference with you. I love you.
Thank you. I love you. But I'm not your patient, Gary.
No, you're not. Listen.
I'm a mental patient, but I'm not your patient.
I have feelings for you, David.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That came out weird.
So coming back to, before the break, we talked about the feelings that can be developed in the therapist, working with the client. And the therapist has to use that diagnostically, therapeutically. So, and look, at our listeners can do that as well. If you're sitting with someone and as a result of being in their company for a while, you're starting to feel anxious, it may be that the person you're sitting with has an anxiety disorder and they're projecting their anxieties onto you, and you haven't quite developed your boundaries to manage that, and it's affecting you. So this is what the therapist does. They self-examine as they're working with the client to say, what are the feelings that this client is causing in me? Where are they coming from? And does that give me insights into my client?
My old therapist back when I was living in San Francisco, I Googled something about her. I Googled her name and something came up about a family member that I don't think she would want public. And I was sitting on that for like a year, because it was oddly similar to something in my life. I know I'm being vague, but I'm trying to think of an example.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Let's say my brother was a race car driver and I Googled her and her brother was a race car driver. It's not at all what happened, but that's like a concrete example. And maybe I was having fights with my brother about race car driving, and that's why I was in therapy. Again, it's just sort of a similar example of what happened. I don't want to go into the specifics because I don't want to mention my therapist by name.
Right. No. You're protecting confidentiality.
But imagine me there, my brother John. I don't think he'd be scared of race cars, but imagine he was like racing too much and he couldn't be supportive, whatever. And meanwhile, I'm sitting there for a year knowing that her brother drives cars too.
I know. And you got to be wondering, how is she responding to this stuff internally?
And I was curious about that for like a year. Finally, I couldn't sit on it anymore. And I blurted it out. I know your brother's a race car driver. Obviously, it wasn't that. But
yeah.
And she was taken aback. Like I saw a look that I'd never seen. And then she immediately composed herself, handled it like a professional. How does that make you feel? Is it, and we did some really good work because it doesn't matter that her brother drove cars.
Right.
It's such a weird example that I've chosen, but it's basically...
It works.
It's a one-to-one comparison of what happened, just with names, details, and relationships changed. And it led to some really good work that we did. I'm glad I mentioned it. here I was thinking I was like crossing her boundaries, and I had pierced through the veil, and I was too much, and I was someone who she would eventually not be able to treat because I'm too insane, and I violated her privacy. And all these feelings I was having privately were great things that we could talk about in therapy, because again, it was never really about me and her. She was just a professional I saw for, 2 hours a week. I went twice a week at that time. I was struggling a bit. But yeah, I think that's like a really good example of how this can play out.
Listen, David, I have had clients who have tried to play gotcha with me.
That's what I did.
Yeah, playing gotcha, where, they will find some snippet about me, my past, or extended kin, and they will throw they're not raising it. They're throwing it in my face. And, the therapist has to manage that. And again, their countertransference, you played gotcha with me. What was my experience of that growing up with my parents? How would I have fought back? Would I be on the defensive? How would I use my defensiveness? Would I be offensive? Would I be slippery? That's why I like having gray hair and sending to other service providers with gray hair. I sit back and I go, oh yes, absolutely, that occurred. Yeah, and it was really something to wrap our heads around, and
But it's why is someone playing gotcha with their therapist? Like, that's the real thing, not the therapist, not the details of the gotcha.
Because they are on the defensive. They're dealing with shame. They're dealing with embarrassment. They're dealing with, how does their past reflect on them in the present?
Everybody's got their own
Absolutely. So the degree to which the therapist is aware of this, manages it appropriately, it's a teaching moment to the client in terms of how to handle this material. And, that's what makes the therapist a professional, that they've done enough self-examination that they can own their and be clear and non-defensive about it.
And this process of sort of viewing somebody through the lens of somebody else, like viewing your therapist like your mom or viewing your therapist like your dad, it's called projecting.
Yes.
And understanding those projections, the ways in which we look at not just your therapist, but maybe your spouse, maybe your friends, like you do characters and things from your childhood. Looking at those can be very healing. I mean, looking at those can be something that self-growth happens with, or growth with the assistance of a therapist.
We talk about the therapist providing a safe space. And this is, what we're talking about right now is a good example of providing that safe space, so that when the client goes for that gotcha with the therapist doesn't attack in return, as may be expected by the client, but rather the therapist says, yeah, owns it, doesn't attack back, and then reflects, how is that for you? Where were you coming from? What did you think would happen? How would you have handled that in a gotcha moment? Right? So we create that safe space so that we can now examine this transference, countertransference process. And all the while, what we're really trying to do is help that client appreciate their past experiences and the impact of those experiences on current life and relationships.
Can it happen outside of therapy? Like, can I look at my girlfriend and be like, oh my God, you're acting like my mom and you are triggering me?
Yes, absolutely. Now, we really want to be careful about the use of that language with a loved one or girlfriend or spouse.
They're not professionals. They may not handle it like a professional.
Oh, that's right. Because we are typically using that as a put down, throwing that in their face to protect ourselves from something that they've seen. So it's more like, I have felt attacked. This is my counter attack. And so that typically doesn't bode so well. If you truly feel that way, just, rather than say you're acting like your mother or your father, say, wow, you're coming in across in a way that triggers me. I don't know if that was your intention.
Gary, this has been a deep, a complex, but an interesting and compelling chat. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Great to be with you. And you will get a hug if ever we meet.
Oh, boy. It's Therapy Thursdays on a Wednesday. Gary Direnfeld is an expert in family and marital therapy. Up next is your dog listening to you, eavesdropping on you, surveilling you when you aren't talking to it. Science says yes. We'll cover that in a moment.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Prepare to have your mind blown as we delve into the complexities of relationships, explore the cutting edge of science, and celebrate the bizarre and beautiful absurdity of the world around us. This is The Last Show with David Cooper.
Is your dog surveilling you? Or are they at least listening to you all the time? Turns out your dog may be tuning into what you say more than you think, even when you're not talking to them. A new study shows dogs can recognize their names and other key words buried in regular, boring human speech. Basically, they're expert eavesdroppers. I'm here with someone who worked on that research. She's a dog behavior researcher at the University of Lincoln in the UK. Her name is Dr. Holly Root-Gutteridge. Holly, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I can't help but ask, and I know it's completely off topic, maybe a terrible first question, but I know my cat's sitting outside of my office door right now. Is my cat maybe listening to me?
Yes, very likely. I have a friend who does a PhD on cats, and she basically said they're about 10 times harder than dogs to get to do anything. So it might be a while before we can prove it.
I know he knows when I'm calling him because he looks at me when I call him. But whether he comes or not, that's a different story. Let's talk about dogs.
Yeah, sure.
Dogs can recognize a limited vocabulary of words, sounds, and behave on those actions. But I think usually people think they need to be addressing them, like that's somehow different than talking about them in conversation. Is there a distinction there between me directly talking to my dog than my dog just passively on the floor, maybe half sleeping, listening to me talk?
So I guess the big difference for the dog side of things is how much they're going to act on what you're saying. So on the whole, in our study, we looked at burying those words in the middle of a stream of speech. So we'd have the owners talk about rainbows for about 25 seconds. And then in the middle, we would record them talking about their dog. So they'd say, like, my dog is Sheba. So I said, Sheba, come on then. And we tried to do it in a very flat tone. So it wasn't too exciting. And she kind of looked at me a little bit, but that was it. Whereas if I use the voice right now, she's sat next to me on the sofa and I do that doggy directed baby talk that we all do when we want to get their attention, you might suddenly see her head appear and her be like, hi, what do you want? So they use the tone of the voice and the context of when we're saying it to determine how much they're going to act on it. But it doesn't mean that they're not listening the rest of the time. It just means maybe they know, like, you're talking about me, but you don't want me to do anything right now.
So if you use that doggy directed baby talk, which I love, I imagine it's a highly academic phrase. I do cat directed baby talk. Before I owned a pet, when I saw other people do it, I cringed. I was like, how can you bear yourself to talk like that? It's embarrassing. Now that I own a pet, I'm doing it all day. So when you talk to a dog in that specific tone, that's when they kind of take action. But they're hearing the words whether you take that tone or not is what you're finding.
Yeah, exactly. So they know that that tone means you want to engage their attention, that you want them to like pay attention to you and do something. And it was found previously that they are more likely to learn a new command if you use it. But it doesn't mean that they don't recognize the words otherwise. It's just a really fun way of getting their attention. A bit like when you talk to a little kid and you want them to come over to you, you're much more likely to get them to come if you're going, hey, come over here, than if you go, hey, come over here, even though the words are just the same.
I've never experienced that. I'm not a fan of children. What does this tell us about the way dogs process speech? I think they understand vocalizations, but also tones. Is this like a new discovery that you've made?
It's building on what we already knew. So we knew they understood some words when said in a tone, but what we found that was new was that they didn't need them to be presented in a discrete little chunk. So we could bury it in this sentence and there could just be a really tiny like comma pause and the dog would still realize you'd said it. Whereas previously it had been thought that they needed it to be without all that clutter around it. So this is really important to dogs in terms of language evolution because if we can chunk up sentences and hear parts that we recognize, we can start building up those chunks into longer, more understandable, meaningful phrases. So like if you got to listen to a whole sentence and you can only understand it if you know every single word, you're really going to struggle when you're learning a new sentence or learning to listen to language. If you can listen to somebody speaking French and you suddenly catch like s'il vous plaît and you're like, oh, I know that bit, you've got something to build on. So this is what's changed, is not do they respond to tone so much as how good are they at recognizing words they know, even when it's not just massive pause, say the words, and then kind of look at them like, hey.
Holly, you don't need to use vous with me. You can say s'il te plaît. Two is fine. Let's talk about the coevolution of humans and dogs. Like dogs' ancestors, wolves, I imagine they didn't understand vocalizations like the dogs we know today. I'm sure they understood like growls and like guttural noises, like angry noises, but not word commands, obviously. What does your research say about the way dogs evolved with us?
So we've had about 45 up to 45,000 years of living with dogs. We've got really good evidence for 14,000 years. We've got burial evidence that there was a definite dog creature then that we have buried in a grave. So we're like 14,000 years, definitely. Up to 45,000 years of domesticating them. We do know wolves do respond to voices if it's familiar. Oh. So we did a lovely study where one of my students played the sounds of keepers talking to the wolves in a bunch of different zoos in Spain. And basically, when the wolves heard their keeper's voice, they were more likely to be interested. So they know what our voices sound like. And I've known some wolves who've learned some commands. So it might be that what we've done is take a really basic ability in wolves and built it up. So the same way that like a pug doesn't look anything like a grey wolf, it might be that like a grey wolf has a little tiny bit of language ability and we've just selected for it. But we would love to go and try this with wolves and see what they do.
I really like how you responded to my incorrect fact, my armchair evolutionary biologist fact, by just kind of like correcting me without being rude. Very classy. Can you explain why dogs perk up when they hear certain vocalizations? Like does this explain why if a dog hears the word walk or park, no matter the tone you take, they sometimes go nuts?
So they've made that same learning association between hearing walk and knowing that they're going to go do something fun and go to the park or go on the walk, which is great because it means they're not just responding to the tone, they're learning the sound of the word. Now, as far as I know, nobody's checked how well they do if you change who's saying it. So it's a little hard to tell then if they've learned it just for the owner's voice or like if I said it, if the dog would still respond to it. If you have like different accents, but I'm pretty sure they would because most dogs will respond to their name, whoever says it, provided you don't get too far afield. My friend is Californian and she has a dog who is called Terry. And in a British accent, that comes out Terry. In a California accent, it comes out a lot more like Tarry. And I would call that dog and he would have no idea what I was saying until I actually tried to put on a very bad California accent and call him. And then he'd be like, oh yeah, I'm coming. So if I yelled Terry, I got nothing. If I yelled Terry, I got him.
It's an amazing American accent. 10 out of 10. I don't know what you're doing in dog behavior researching. You should be in Hollywood right now.
But yeah, my yell of Tarry definitely got more interest. So they are learning the shape of the word and then they're making a really strong association. Same as we learn what words mean by showing ourselves like, okay, this is an object and it's called X. And it just depends how long they take to make that association. Some are really easy. I think most dogs will learn most food words really fast. The more abstract it gets, the harder it gets to teach them that there's this association between this thing and this sound that I'm making.
Are there any other curious or interesting findings from your research with dogs listening to people?
So one of the things we wanted to do was look at whether dogs respond differently to men and women. So we got a bunch of heterosexual couples to come in with their dogs, and men do not tend to do that baby talk voice half as much. So we thought maybe the dogs will respond more when the guy's voice is flat because, you know, when he's engaging the dog, he's more likely to just go, hey, Sheba, come on then. And we didn't find a sex difference at all, which surprised us. We really thought they would be more like responsive to guys' flat voices than women's flat voices. But despite that, nope, dogs were just as good at hearing the ladies bury the word in the sentence as they were at hearing the men.
Well, Dr. Holly Root-Gutteridge is a dog behavior researcher at the University of Lincoln in the UK. Holly, thank you for chatting with me. This was fun, and thanks for sharing your research. Finding out about dogs and how they listen to us has been quite a joy.
This was wonderful. Thank you.
Are you unsatisfied with your life? Well, it turns out you may not be completely to blame. It turns out your personality and your level of life satisfaction may have genetic roots. You may have inherited it from your ancestors. So is your personality even your happiness? Down to nature, nurture, and is this your grumpy uncle's excuse to be a jerk around the holidays? We'll find out together after the break.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Your above-average intelligence brought you here. It deserves above-average absurdity. This is The Last Show with David Cooper.
How much of your personality, even your happiness, comes down to genetics? Is being happy in your DNA or more something you learned during life? Well, my guest today, psychology professor René Mõttus, who works at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland and the University of Tartu in Estonia, led a new study that found that life satisfaction and personality traits may be far more heritable than we've long believed. Is it nature? Is it nurture? And why is your grumpy uncle so rude? Does he have a genetic excuse? That's what we'll discuss today. René, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Let's start simple. In your little introduction there, I used a word that I don't really understand well. Heritable. What exactly are we talking about when we say personality and happiness and life satisfaction are heritable?
Well, this means we see variability. It's a bit technical word, but with the differences among people in the population and vary in anything. And these levels that we see, the reasons are partly genetic that we see these differences. That's what it means. So the heritability is the degree to which these differences that we see among people come down to genetic differences between them.
Colloquially, we say things like, oh, it runs in the family. For example, I'm lactose intolerant. So is my mother. So is my mother's mother. Is that what we're talking about? Or is it more complicated, more having to do with DNA, like recessive genes and all these kinds of things?
Yeah, of course it is, but it's just very important to understand that heritability is a sort of, we call it technically again a population phenomenon or a group level phenomenon. It's about the differences among people that we see and how much these differences are because of genetic reasons. It doesn't say, like if we say, oh, something is like 50% heritable, it doesn't mean that 50% of your, happiness is genetic and the other 50% comes from genes. For any one individual, it can be totally because of genetics or totally because of experiences. But on average, these reasons, genetic reasons, account for about 50% variance.
So walk me through the study. Did you just survey people? Did you test their genetics? Did you survey their family members? How do you come to conclusions about people's happiness based on their who they descended from?
Yeah, all of these actually. That's how I usually do is we survey people because, things like life satisfaction or personality traits. There's really not any other way to assess them or measure them properly than just ask people. And then we have to do it for people who are genetically related. And then we know their degree of relatedness. Like we know that parents and children, for example, they share about 50% of this genetic material in which people generally differ. Like most of the genetic material obviously is the same for everybody in the population, but there's a fraction in which people differ. And of this fraction, about 50% is different for parents and children and full siblings and so on. And then there's a group of people like nephews and such like that for whom it's 25%. So now if we know this genetic relatedness, we can compare their similarity levels in life satisfaction, for example. And if people who are genetically more related are also more similar in the life satisfaction level, then this shows that's some heritability. And this sort of how tight this relationship is between genetic similarity and happiness similarity, for example, then that is the degree of heritability. If it's very tight relationship, then it's highly heritable. If it's kind of looser, then it's less heritable.
Let's get nerdy for a second here. You said genetic relatedness. Did you use something called the Estonian Biobank in your research? Like, how did you look at that data and then find out whether people were happy or not?
Yeah. Usually people have done this research by just asking, like, oh, that's your sister or brother or mom or dad or something. But the way we did it, because there's like 20% of Estonian population is part of the biobank. It's a really unique study in that sense. And there's a lot of people are genetically related. And we know this because they have been genotyped. Basically, they've donated a blood sample and their DNA has been sequenced based on this. And we know from their DNA sequences whether they're, like crime movies, like you can say somebody is a child-parent relationship or something. So we know for everybody if they're genetically related. So we could look at the pairs of relatives, full siblings, parents, children, and so-called second-degree relatives like grandparents, grandchildren, these and nuts and such like. So that's what we did there. And we had what we did different. I mean, people have done this stuff before, obviously, but why we found that life satisfaction and personality traits are more heritable than people have usually found is that we just didn't use people's self-ratings of their satisfaction or their personality traits, but every person that we studied also had somebody else, usually their partner, who rated their satisfaction and personality traits. Now, the benefit of this is because it's not surprising if we just ask people questions and they provide these self-ratings. They are kind of biased. There's some truth in it, but there's also a lot of bias and just noise in there. Like, people have different reasons for saying yes, other than maybe less so strong yes, or all these things, and they're actually pretty big problems. But if we combine multiple pieces of information, then the measurement just gets so much better, and that allowed us to see get a more accurate picture how heritable the stuff is.
So walk me through that accurate picture. What conclusions or new conclusions have you come to about this stuff?
Okay, so if we think about the kind of heritability that makes ordinary people similar, genetically related people similar, like parents and kids and siblings. So usually studies have shown it's about 25% of these make up about 25% of the reasons that people differ in personality traits or satisfaction levels, things like this. Now, our estimates shifted this upwards to just over 40%. So that's a pretty big increase, like not twice as heritable as people had thought before, but halfway there. So it's quite a big difference. So let's say about 40% of the reasons that we see people varying in their satisfaction level or personality trait levels, it's because of these genetic reasons that come down in the family from parents to kids. Actually, if you want to get really nerdy,
sure.
There's even more genetic reasons that matter, but some of these reasons are like super complicated. You mentioned this recessiveness and dominance and that sort of thing that people often study in high school. These things also matter, and they are genetic reasons, but they don't make really parents and children much more similar than just random people or just ordinary siblings. They only make like identical twins more similar to one another. So they're genetic reasons, but they're not that visible when you look at just people around us.
You're a psychology professor. You don't just look at, genes and stuff like that. Does this mean if I'm miserable, like I'm not to blame, like I can't do anything to fix it? I'm a victim of circumstances. I'm a victim of my DNA. Or are there things we can do, like therapy, things we can do in life to try to become happy despite our genes?
Oh yeah, of course we can. And people do this regularly, and it's shown to how. Of course, the reasons that some people do go to therapy and some people don't go to therapy are also have something to do with genetics. So we're kind of, it's just the reasons cascade down to all the way to some other genetic reasons to some extent. But of course, people can change. People do change, and they can actively work on themselves to change for better, and also be happier. But it's just what we study and what we see in these studies is just what typically happens among people. And typically, these genetic reasons still kind of are pretty important, and probably the most important, like single kind of pulling factor and sort of nudges some people's happiness level up and some people's happiness level down. But it's what typically happens. But it doesn't mean that this is the absolutely has to be that way. There could be reasons that change this. It just usually doesn't happen.
So I don't have an excuse if I'm a miserable piece of you-know-what. There's things I can do despite my genetics. Well, thanks for sharing your study. I appreciate it. René Mõttus is a psychology professor at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland and the University of Tartu in Estonia. Check out his podcast, Personality Psychology Podcast. That's available wherever you search for things like that. René, thank you again for talking to me. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
In a continuing series of jobs you and I could probably never do, up next we'll talk to a death doula. That's somebody who hangs out with a family to assist in the death of a loved one. I've got questions, so it's everything you wanted to know about this job that you probably couldn't do, and the deep questions about what it all means when we go. That up next.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. The last show with David Cooper. Procrastinate your life away with us.
As part of a continuing installment of jobs you and I could probably never do, she helps plan people for death the way others plan for a wedding, minus the DJ and fish. My guest now is a death doula, half guide, half Sherpa, half spiritual bouncer. That's too many halves. She sits with the dying, comforts the living, and isn't afraid to talk about the one thing that most of us avoid until, well, it's too late. Whether you never think about death, whether you think about it often, or like me, only during tax season, let's unpack what a death doula does. I am here with Roula Said. You can also check out her upcoming Toronto Fringe Festival show called Very Shady Arab Ladies, and it'll be playing at the Video Cabaret Theatre. Roula, that is your introduction. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, David.
I'm sure I framed what a death doula does in much too silly a way. So walk me through it. How is it different from like a hospice worker or maybe a therapist? What is a death doula?
A death doula really is a companion, a non-medical person that can fill in some of those sort of subtle areas between medical professionals. Some people don't make it to hospice to die. Some people's families are not necessarily comfortable or really able to enter into the kinds of conversations that someone might feel like they need to have. Someone may not have a therapist or may not have a priest or an elder or someone that they can turn to from their faith. So someone like me might be able to just hold a space for someone to listen to what they're genuinely feeling and how they feel like they're being guided through their process of dying.
Whether it's a loved one or the family, what drew you to this work?
Honestly, I feel, and I think most people who do this feel like it's a kind of a calling, which may or may not resonate with.
Yeah, no. I mean, it does, but not this specific calling, for me at least.
Yeah. My father died when I was 40 days old.
Wow.
So I felt in a way like I've walked with one hand on the other side of the veil my whole life. Sort of felt like death is a strangely familiar presence for me. And I found myself at several bedsides of people who died that I really kind of shouldn't have been there, but it just so happened that I was in that moment there. And it felt like I was right to be there. And and I felt like this was something that was being asked of me. So I kind of stepped up and did some training and made myself available to those who might seek to work with me.
Strangely familiar. It's right to be there. These are interesting things that I'm picking up on. How do you help someone who is scared of dying? How do you help the family of someone at the bedside, whether it's a hospital bed, whether it's at home, wherever it is? Like, For me, my best advice is just kind of being there, listening, validating, don't shying away from the conversations, even though you don't know what to say. But there must be more to it than that.
Well, honestly, what you've said is a big part of it, is to listen, is to, I come from a perspective that as in birth, and I see death in a way as a kind of a reverse birth, that there is agency in a way that we may not consider. People don't think that, babies actually have anything to do with their own birth, but they do. And I think sometimes people who are dying feel like everything is being done to them and things are happening to their bodies. And all of that is true, but there's also a kind of inner presence that does have agency and that is able to guide people. People talk about the fact that, sometimes a family member will hang on until all the family arrives and then they finally die. Or sometimes, a family member will wait until everybody has left and then they'll finally die. So there are these experiences that people have where it's not just a kind of random moment or something that's completely from elsewhere. And so that's part of what I consider to be kind of a toolkit that I can bring, is to help to grow that capacity to listen, for me to listen, but also for the person or the family members who may or may not be part of that process to also listen to what is being asked and to how to facilitate the journey that is unfolding, the kind of to align with it, because sometimes I think there can be a lot of fear and fight and battling. There's a lot of sort of war language in how we deal with things like illness and disease. People are kind of encouraged to fight, and there's sometimes a feeling of that you failed if you surrender to death. That you haven't fought hard enough.
Yes.
I mean, it really depends on the person, depends on the circumstances. And, of course, sometimes finding will and finding fight is exactly what you need. And then there's times when that's not helpful because you need to find something else to do with the energy that you have left. So I feel like that's, kind of helping navigate sort of humbly, because, of course, I don't know ever what is right. Like, how can I ever claim to know what is actually right for someone else, or how to actually advise anything in the face of the greatest mystery and potentially fear that any of us have, which is death. I sort of humbly walk in and see what may or may not be mine to do, and I try to do it.
You mentioned the fight. When my aunt was passing, it was strange because she wasn't really fighting. Her cancer had come back and the prognosis was grim. Mm. But in her last months, she really changed. She was really happy to be around. She was really at peace. She just wanted to have those special, deep conversations with people. I really valued my last visit with her. I use that frame to ask this question. Do people ever change their minds or their priorities, or the people around them just completely shift their priorities once they know they're dying?
I think so. I think death can come with a lot of gifts, for the dying and for the living. And I think sometimes in our fear of it, and of course it comes also with loss and grief and heartache, and sometimes in a lot of pain and suffering. But I feel like death itself comes with gifts. It comes with beauty, comes like an ocean of love. And when it's time, and when it's met with that openness, I feel like it can bring profound change and profound gifts to the living and to the dying.
If someone is looking to retain a death doula to help either them or a loved one through this journey through a loved one passing or themselves passing, what's the best way to do it? You just search online, or?
You can search online. Yeah, there are death doulas all over the world now. Sometimes they're called end-of-life doulas, sometimes called death midwives, although I think there's some pushback about that. But yeah, there are people who just will walk with you often from a moment of diagnosis right up until the end, or sometimes beyond. And there's many, many ways that a death doula can serve in terms of helping to get some of your advanced care planning, like documents together, to even helping if a family wants to care for a body at home after death, to have a home funeral. All these many layers are possible to be supported by a death doula.
Well, you can check out death doula Roula Said's show in the upcoming Toronto Fringe Festival, Very Shady Arab Lady, playing at the Video Cabaret Theatre. Roula, thank you for joining me today. I've enjoyed our chat.
Yeah, likewise.
Coming up after the break, a newly discovered world under the Antarctic ice. New alien sea creatures in a part of the world we thought there was no life. What strange, weird secrets are contained deep below the dark, cold ocean floor, or at least on the Antarctic ocean floor? Answers in just a few moments.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Keep listening to The Last Show with David Cooper, because the alien invasion can wait. The Last Show with David Cooper.
People are always searching for and dreaming of life beyond Earth, way out there in the cosmos. But there's amazing, unimaginable, undiscovered life right here on Earth. A team of scientists found a thriving, alien-like world under the Antarctic ice. Step aside, UFOs. The real aliens might be crabs riding on sponges in cold, deep sea water. I'm here with a co-chief scientist on the expedition that found this life under the Antarctic ice. His name is Dr. Sasha Montelli. He's a geophysicist and glaciologist. Sasha, thanks for talking to me today.
Thank you for having me, David.
You have the coolest job title. I feel like if I were at a bar and I said, what do you do? And you said, oh, I'm a geophysicist and glaciologist, I would just think you were the coolest guy in the world. But we've got so much exciting stuff to talk about. Let's forget the job title for now. Paint us a picture. What is it like to suddenly discover life on Earth where you didn't think it would be and it hadn't been discovered before?
It is the very intense moment of exhilaration. And it's not the fact that we found life itself. It's the fact that the life we found was so thriving, so diverse, and so sustained under effectively 200-meter thick wall of ice, which is also extent over areas that is comparable to, small European country. So it's really very intimate sense of being extremely lucky, very intense sense of exhilaration and serendipity.
I want to latch on to the word thriving. This wasn't just like a sickly fish who wandered in the wrong part of the ocean. This is a thriving community of life under the George VI ice shelf.
Yes.
I don't know why George is so lucky to have an ice shelf named after him, but again, I don't want to digress too much. How rare is it for an opportunity like this, for a scientist like you, to actually make a discovery like this?
To my knowledge, we are the first ones to actually be able to do such a comprehensive interdisciplinary study of what is essentially an under ice shelf environment. So the reason is because, as I said, these hundreds of meters thick walls of ice, extremely remote areas of the planet that are extremely difficult to get under. And so the only way really to observe this ecosystems in situ is if you're lucky enough to be right time, right place, where iceberg can calve off and drift away rapidly, so that you have an opportunity to go there and actually do your investigations. It's almost impossible to predict, and so we were just extremely fortunate during that cruise that happened right next door where we were working. So we just pivoted all our plans and went into the unknown.
It's so funny how luck plays such a role in some of the great things we achieve in life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What is it like to go down there and get these first images that a bunch of nerds hanging around a screen being like, oh my goodness?
So I was particularly lucky because we had shifts to log all the species that we find. So usually you have this remotely operated vehicle that can take very high definition videos. And usually when you descend, you just see the water column. So there are fleeting species just passing by, and it's exciting, but it's you really are waiting for the moment when you descend to the seafloor. And when I was on my watch, I was seeing exactly that moment when the remotely operated vehicle descends through the water column and suddenly it reaches the seafloor, and straight away we see these walls of outcrops of rock, dark, kind of, for lay audience could be, what looks like a boring piece of rock, but on it there are sort of hanging gardens of diverse, colorful, flamboyant corals, beautiful range of colors from purple to white to pink, sort of like pastel sunset kind of color palette. And I'm not a biologist myself, I'm geologist, geophysicist, glaciologist, but just seeing this was, I just couldn't, I was just completely frozen.
Compared to, let's say, another field in science, what level of discovery is this? Like, how big is this in terms of, I guess, glaciologists, also biologists? Are these all new species down there, completely uncatalogued?
This is an interesting part because obviously you would expect this environment to be completely different because it's light doesn't get there. There is no vertical flux of nutrients, nothing snowing from the surface of the water. But what we found actually is that the ecosystems, actually there is sort of continuum, and there are lots of species that are very similar to the areas that we also looked at, the areas that are not overlain by ice shelf. And I think the reason for that is because we have this vigorous circulation, oceanic circulation going underneath and from the ice shelf that basically transport the nutrients around the system from below ice shelf to the external areas. That enables, I think, from our preliminary observations, this ecosystem to thrive even under area where there is no light or vertical supply of nutrients.
So specimeni, I don't know. The animals and sea creatures and plants you found down there are cousins of already understood ones for the most part?
It looks like, for the most part, there are many similarities, but I think taxonomists and biologists who are competent enough to identify what species they are, I think they already suspect that we found at least 5 or 6 new species.
Yeah.
And that's not a surprise. And generally, when you go into deep sea, it's quite typical in expeditions like this when you find new species. But so it looks like there is a range of both cousins of species that live outside, but also the new species as well.
I know you're not a biologist, but you did have access to the video feed. You were there. What were some of the things you saw? Ice fish, giant sea spiders, crabs? What were some of the amazing things you saw?
Crabs, sea cucumbers, lots of sea cucumbers, sponges. Sponges are particularly interesting, actually, because we think that it takes decades, if not centuries, for big sponges to grow. So what it means is that these ecosystems have been sustained over a long time. It's not just they suddenly grew there after calving of icebergs. Those indeed are ecosystems that have been sustained over long periods of time under these ice shelves. And so in this sense, sponges are particularly diagnostic of that. And so that also, we need to keep in mind that ice shelves were actually much more extensive back in time. So we have access to satellite imagery from 1960s and 70s. And we know for a fact that ice shelf actually was in advanced position relative to where it is now, up to 40 kilometers. So ice was there, not only was there over time, but it was even more extensive. So I think it's this vigorous oceanic circulation controlled by meltwater from ice and access of deep waters from Antarctic continental shelf that enables this circulation, and it's in turn steered by the very rugged topography that we were able to map. So it's one of the examples where we see a really nice example of truly interdisciplinary study where each of the segments really fall into place really nicely to explain how this ecosystem potentially can thrive in this environment.
Not to be a Debbie Downer, but the Antarctic is changing rapidly. What could this hidden ecosystem tell us about climate change or the future of the planet? Are you worried about ecosystems like this disappearing?
So that's a great question, actually. To answer that, I guess what we need to do really is to go, because we have such a precise locations of where we did sampling, and we have really time zero in the sense, right after collapse of the ice shelf, or rather the calving event. So we can go there in a couple of years' time and go descend in exactly the same spots and see what is the change. How does this overall retreat of ice shelf actually affects this environment? So this is something that to be addressed in the future. But the other work that we did that is really relevant to climate change is obviously the purely physical geographic one, where we can see the patterns of melting from ice shelves, how oceanic water circulates, how that contributes to the retreat of ice shelves, and that will help us to calibrate numerical models to better project future. So this is really important observational piece of evidence that will then be used to constrain numerical models. So it's a great example where we investigated ice-ocean interactions on a range of timescales from thousands of years to hundreds of years to present, and how these ice-ocean interactions affect ecosystems.
Sasha, thank you for sharing your amazing discovery with us, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, David.
Dr. Sasha Montelli is a geophysicist and glaciologist. That is the last show. I am David Cooper. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to check out our podcast online at lastshow.pizza. That's lastshow.pizza, not .com.pizza. We'll be back tomorrow night.